"Give me the fat one," the mountain man said. The crowd fell silent. 80 men had rejected her, mocked her, turned her into entertainment. But Samuel Thornhill didn't ask, didn't negotiate. He dropped $800 on the table, double the asking price. $300 for her, $500 to make you forget she ever existed. What happened next would start a war that nearly burned Thunder Peak to the ground. But to understand why a mountain man would steal a woman in broad daylight, you need to know how this story really began. The old man sat in his rocking chair on the porch of Thunder Peak, watching the first snow of autumn 1918 dust the Colorado Rockies. His grandson Samuel Jr., 12 years old with eyes full of questions, waited beside him with the patience only children possess when they know a good story is coming. "You want to know how your grandmother came to me, boy?" The child nodded, pulling his jacket tighter against the cold. Sam Thornhill, 79 years old, now smiled through the deep lines that mapped his weathered face like rivers on ancient stone. "Then I'll tell you. But first you need to understand something. What I did that day in Copper Ridge, December 18, 1878, was the worst crime I ever committed." "What crime, Grandpa?" "I stole a woman, in broad daylight, in front of the whole town." Young Samuel's eyes widened. "Was it Grandma?" The old man's smile deepened, reaching places in his heart that had been cold for too long. "Before I answer that, you need to know about a man named Silas Drummond. In 1878, Copper Ridge wasn't a place for the weak. And Drummond, he was the devil in a tailored suit." Sam poured whiskey into 2 tin cups, passing one to his grandson with the solemnity of a ritual. The boy took it, understanding somehow that this was a moment of becoming, of crossing from childhood into the hard truths of men. Now listen close, because this story doesn't start with love. It starts with desperation. And sometimes, boy, that's the same thing. The old man's eyes grew distant, seeing not the mountains before him, but the snow-covered square of a town 40 years gone. His voice dropped lower, taking on the cadence of memory of time folding back on itself. December 18th, 1878, 9:47 in the morning, 8 degrees below freezing and getting colder. The world shifted, the present faded, and the past rose up like smoke. Grace Murphy stood on the wooden platform in Copper Ridge Town Square, her breath freezing white in the mountain air. Her hands trembled as she clutched a small cloth bag containing everything she owned in this world: 2 dresses, a Bible her mother had given her before deciding Grace was too expensive to keep, and a letter she had written to herself on the train west. A letter she would never send. The letter said, "Maybe someone will see me as more than a burden." 9 other young women had stood beside her an hour ago. Mail-order brides, they called them, though the term felt too clean for what this truly was. Human commerce, the selling of hope to desperate men and desperate women both. One by one, the other 9 had been chosen, selected, claimed. Grace had watched each departure with a sinking certainty. She knew what they saw when they looked at her: a woman of 26 years, too old by frontier standards, too broad in the hips, too soft in the face, too heavy to be desirable. She had spent her entire life being told she took up too much space, consumed too much food, cost too much to maintain. Her stepmother's voice lived in her head like a curse: "You eat like a field hand and look like one too." Her brother's laughter echoed in her memory: "No man will marry you unless he's blind, deaf, and owns a very strong horse." And her father, the kindest of the cruelties, had simply looked away when they put her on the train. No goodbye, no blessing. Just the relief of a man unburdened. Cornelius Whitmore, the flesh merchant who had brought them west, tapped his walking stick against the platform with sharp, impatient strikes. He was a man of perhaps 50 years, dressed in silk, and lies his smile as sharp as broken glass. "Gentlemen," Whitmore announced to the crowd of 80 men gathered in the cold, "we have one bride remaining, Miss Grace Murphy, 26 years of age, from Boston. She can cook, she can sew, and she is quite, shall we say, sturdy for the heavy work required in these mountains." Laughter rolled through the crowd like thunder before a storm. A drunk miner near the front shouted, She's so heavy I'd have to pay extra tax on my horse. More laughter, cruel and cutting. Another voice, maybe she could pull the plow herself, save money on an ox. Grace bit her lip until she tasted copper. She had endured insults her entire life, had built walls around her heart thick enough to stop bullets. But this standing alone before a crowd of strangers as they mocked her existence, as they turned her desperation into entertainment, this was a new species of pain. Her cheeks burned despite the cold. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. She thought of the letter in her bag, the hope she had dared to carry west. It was foolish. It had always been foolish. The cold wind cut through her thin cotton dress. She had sold her warm coat in St. Louis to afford food for the rest of the journey, a decision she now regretted as hypothermia crept into her bones with patient malice. Surely, Whitmore continued, his voice dripping with false cheer, one of you fine gentlemen has unusual tastes, or perhaps needs a woman who can work like two people. Very economical, really. A man near the back, reeking of whiskey even at this hour. I wouldn't take her if you paid me. Grace closed her eyes. She would not cry. She would not give them that satisfaction. She heard the hoofbeats before the crowd fell silent. The laughter died as if God himself had reached down and strangled it. Grace opened her eyes. A horse black as midnight and tall 16 hands at least moved through the crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea. The men stepped back, some out of respect, others out of fear. The rider sat the horse with the ease of a man who had been born in the saddle. He was massive, 6 feet 5 inches, if he was a yard shoulders broad enough to block the winter sun. A scar ran from his hairline down across his left cheek, white against weathered skin. His beard was thick, streaked with iron gray. His eyes were the color of storm clouds gathering over distant peaks. He wore leather and wool, nothing fancy, but everything functional. A rifle rested across his saddle. A large knife hung at his hip. This was not a man who made idle threats. The whispers started immediately spreading through the crowd like wildfire through dry grass. That's Thunder Peak. The mountain man. Heard he killed a grizzly with just a knife. His wife and son died 4 years back. Hasn't come down from his mountain since. Why's he here now? Samuel Thornhill dismounted with the heavy deliberation of a man who did nothing without purpose. He walked toward the platform, each step measured, his boots crunching in the snow with finality. He looked at no one except Grace. His eyes met hers, and she saw something she had never seen in a man's gaze before. Not pity, not mockery, not desire. Something else entirely, something like recognition. I'll take her. Not I'd like to purchase, not I'll consider her, not even I choose her. I'll take her, as if the decision had been made before he arrived, as if there had never been any doubt. Whitmore blinked momentarily, thrown off his practiced script. Mr. Thornhill, I'm honored by your interest. The asking price is $300, and I assure you. Sam reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. He dropped it on the table in front of Whitmore with a sound like coins falling into a well. Whitmore opened it, and his eyes went wide. This is $800. I know. Sam's voice was deep, resonant, the kind of voice that could call across canyons and be heard. 300 for her, 500 to ensure you never come back to Copper Ridge, and to ensure you forget she was ever here. The crowd had gone absolutely silent. Men held their breath. Even the wind seemed to pause. Whitmore swallowed hard, his merchant's instinct warring with his survival instinct. He was being bought off, publicly, and he was smart enough to recognize that refusing this particular man would be a very bad idea. Yes, of course, Mr. Thornhill. Very generous. Very, very generous indeed. Sam turned to Grace. He extended his hand. The palm was calloused, scarred across the knuckles, marked by a life of hard work. But the gesture was gentle. Come. Grace stared at that hand. She looked up at the scarred face, at eyes that held no cruelty. She thought of her father turning away as the train pulled out of Boston. She thought of her stepmother's relief at having one less mouth to feed. She thought of the letter in her bag with its childish hope. Maybe someone will see me as more than a burden. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm, despite the cold, steady, despite her trembling. As Sam led her away from the platform, away from Whitmore, away from the crowd of men who had rejected her, whispers followed them like smoke. "He's lost his mind. The mountains made him crazy. Poor fool doesn't know what he's gotten himself into. That woman will eat him out of house and home." But one voice, an older man near the edge of the crowd, said something different. "No, look at how he walks. He knows exactly what he's doing." Grace didn't understand what that meant. She didn't understand any of this. But she held on to Sam's hand like a drowning woman holds on to driftwood, and she walked. Behind them, on a second-floor balcony above the general store, two men watched the entire transaction with very different expressions. Silas Drummond stood with a glass of brandy in his perfectly manicured hand. He was 52 years old, handsome in a cold, calculated way, his silver hair slicked back with expensive pomade. He wore a suit that cost more than most men in Copper Ridge earned in a year. Beside him, Father Benedict Hayes, the town's Catholic priest, stood in his black cassock, his face troubled. "Thornhill just made the biggest mistake of his life," Drummond said, his voice smooth as silk and just as dangerous. "How so?" Father Benedict asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "I've had men watching Thornhill for 18 months. I know when he comes to town. I know what he buys. Flour, ammunition, salt. And I know—" Drummond smiled, and it was the smile of a snake before it strikes, that he recently discovered a silver vein on his property, the largest strike in this entire territory. Father Benedict frowned. "But he's never minded. The land sits fallow." "Not anymore." Drummond turned from the window, swirling the brandy in his glass. "He just brought a woman home. That means he's planning to stay, to settle, to build a life, which means he'll start mining that silver. And you want it." "Want is such a small word, Father." Drummond's eyes glinted with something darker than greed. "I intend to have it, by legal means preferably. But I'm not particular about methodology." Father Benedict shifted uncomfortably. He knew too much about Drummond's methods. He owed Drummond $5,000 borrowed 3 years ago to build a new church, a debt that came with strings attached, strings that had slowly become chains. "What does that woman have to do with your plans?" Drummond set down his glass and pulled a document from his inner coat pocket. He unfolded it with the care of a man handling a weapon. "This," he said, "is a contract, signed December 5, 1878, a purchase agreement between myself and the Whitmore Agency for one Grace Murphy, $300, fully notarized." Father Benedict stared at the document. "But Whitmore just sold her to Thornhill." "Exactly." Drummond folded the contract back up, tucking it away like a trump card. "Whitmore sold her twice. Once to me 2 weeks ago, once to Thornhill today, which means legally Miss Murphy is my property. And Thornhill just stole her. That's why you paid $800. You knew this would happen." Drummond's smile widened. "I suggested to Whitmore that he describe her in terms that would appeal to Thornhill. A grieving widower always seeks echoes of what he lost. I made sure Grace Murphy was the only woman left on that platform when Thornhill arrived. I even delayed his trip to town by having my men spread rumors of bandits on the northern road, ensuring he'd arrive late." Father Benedict felt sick. "You orchestrated everything." "I prefer the term facilitated, and now I have legal grounds to charge Samuel Thornhill with theft of property. The United States Marshal will be very interested in this case. Thornhill will face 5 years in prison unless—" Drummond paused for effect. "He agrees to sell me Thunder Peak at a price I dictate. And if he refuses, then I'll take the woman back, as is my legal right. And I'll ensure Thornhill watches from a jail cell as I mine his mountain dry." Drummond walked to his desk, pulling out a telegraph form. "I'll give him 30 days to enjoy his little fantasy. Then the hammer falls." Father Benedict wanted to object, wanted to say this was wrong, immoral, a perversion of justice. But he looked at Drummond's cold eyes and remembered the $5,000 he could never repay, and he said nothing. Outside, snow began to fall, the first real snow of winter. And on the edge of town, Samuel Thornhill helped Grace Murphy onto his horse with a gentleness that surprised her. He didn't speak, didn't explain, didn't make promises. He simply mounted behind her, clicked his tongue, and guided the horse toward the mountains, toward Thunder Peak, toward a future neither of them could yet imagine. As they left Copper Ridge behind, Grace felt something shift inside her chest. Not hope exactly. She had learned not to trust hope, but perhaps the distant cousin of hope, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the world held more than cruelty. She didn't know that 40 years later her grandson would sit on a porch and listen to this story. She didn't know that this moment, this cold December morning, was the hinge on which the rest of her life would turn. She only knew that for the first time in 26 years, a man had looked at her and seen something worth claiming, even if she didn't yet understand what that something was. The journey up the mountain began in silence. Sam rode behind Grace, keeping the horse to a steady walk as they left the valley floor and began the long climb toward Thunder Peak. The cold deepened with each 100 feet of elevation, turning Grace's breath into clouds of white vapor. After 3 hours, Sam pulled the horse to a stop beside a frozen stream. "You hungry?" Grace nodded, not trusting her voice. Sam dismounted and helped her down. His hands were careful, as if she were something fragile despite her size. He pulled a cloth bundle from his saddlebag and unwrapped it on a flat rock: dried beef, hard bread, dried apples. He handed her half without comment, then sat on a boulder and ate his portion in silence, his eyes on the mountains ahead. Grace took the food with trembling fingers. She was accustomed to being watched when she ate, to hearing comments about her appetite, to feeling shame with every bite. Her stepmother had made meals a gauntlet of judgment. But Sam didn't watch her. He ate his own food methodically, efficiently, like a man fueling a machine. Grace ate slowly at first, waiting for the criticism. When none came, she ate a little faster. The bread was hard, the meat tough, but it was food freely given without strings attached, and that made it taste better than any feast she'd known in Boston. When she finished, Sam stood and gathered the cloth. "Can you ride?" "Not well, sir." "Call me Sam." He moved to the horse, a massive gelding with intelligent eyes. "The trail ahead is steep. You'll ride midnight here. I'll walk." Grace blinked. "But you'll be exhausted." "I've walked this trail 200 times. Sam lifted her onto the saddle with surprising ease for a man of his size. "Midnight won't let you fall. Just hold the reins light and trust him." She wanted to argue, to say this wasn't fair, but the look in Sam's eyes stopped her. This wasn't charity. This was practicality. He was making a decision based on what worked, not on what was polite. They continued upward. The temperature dropped to 10 degrees below freezing as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. Pine trees grew taller, denser, their branches heavy with accumulated snow. The air thinned, making Grace's breath come harder. Sam walked ahead, his pace, never varying his boots, finding purchase on ice-covered rocks with the certainty of long practice. He didn't speak, but occasionally he would glance back to check on her, his gray eyes unreadable. Grace studied him as they traveled. He moved with the economy of a man who wasted no energy. Every step was placed with precision. Every movement had purpose. This was a man shaped by the wilderness, by survival, by loss. The scar on his face had depth-layered white tissue, suggesting not a single cut, but perhaps a wound that had torn open multiple times before healing. His hands, when they had touched her, were mapped with old scars and calluses thick as leather. This was not a gentleman in the traditional sense, but he had been gentle with her. Why, as the sun touched the peaks and the shadows grew long, Sam stopped again. "We'll camp here tonight." Grace slid from the horse, her legs shaking from hours in the saddle. Sam didn't comment on her unsteadiness. He simply moved to a protected hollow between two large boulders and began setting up camp with practiced efficiency. He built a fire in 15 minutes, coaxing flame from frozen wood with techniques Grace had never seen. He melted snow for water. He set up a small hide tent, barely large enough for one person, but offering shelter from the wind that had begun to howl through the trees. From his pack he pulled dried beans, salt pork, and iron pot. He added snow water and set it to boil. "You can stir that," he said, handing her a wooden spoon. "I'll get more firewood." It was such a small thing, such a simple delegation of responsibility. But for Grace, who had spent her life being told she was incompetent at everything except perhaps scrubbing floors, it felt like trust. She knelt by the fire and stirred the pot carefully, ensuring the bottom didn't burn. The smell of cooking beans rose into the cold air, and despite the temperature, despite the fear still coiled in her stomach, Grace felt something unexpected. Peace. When Sam returned with an armload of wood, he glanced at the pot and nodded once. Not praise exactly, but acknowledgement. She had done the task correctly. They ate in silence, the beans simple but hot, the warmth spreading through Grace's body like a benediction. The fire crackled between them, throwing dancing shadows across Sam's scarred face. "This is good," Sam said finally. "You stirred it right. Not many people know to keep it moving so it doesn't stick." Grace felt her cheeks warm and not from the fire. "Thank you." Another silence. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who didn't yet know how to talk to each other, but were content to share space. As Grace finished her portion, Sam stood and spread out a bedroll near the fire. "You sleep here. I'll keep watch. You need rest too. I'll sleep when the fire burns low. Wolves prowl at night up here. Someone needs to watch." Grace wanted to argue, but exhaustion pulled at her like gravity. She lay down on the bedroll and Sam covered her with a thick blanket made of wolf pelts. The warmth was immediate and overwhelming. Grace's eyes grew heavy. As she drifted toward sleep, she heard Sam begin to hum. A melody low and sad in a language she recognized. An Irish ballad, the same one her mother used to sing when Grace was small before the world had taught her she was unworthy of lullabies. Grace's eyes opened. "You know that song?" Sam stopped humming. He sat on a log across the fire rifle across his knees, his face half in shadow. "Mary, my wife, she was Irish. She sang that to our son at night. Thomas." Sam's jaw tightened. "He died when he was 6. 4 years, 2 months, 11 days ago, along with Mary." The specificity of that timeline cut through Grace like a blade. This man didn't just remember the year, he remembered the days. He was still counting. "I'm so sorry." Sam nodded slowly, his eyes on the fire. "Sleep now. Tomorrow's a longer climb." Grace closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come immediately. She heard Sam shift on his log, heard him check the rifle, heard the distant howl of a wolf somewhere in the darkness beyond their small circle of light, and she realized something that made her breath catch. This man, this scarred mountain giant who had paid $800 for a woman no one else wanted, was going to sit awake all night in sub-zero temperatures to keep her safe from wolves. She didn't understand it, didn't understand him. But as she finally drifted into sleep, Grace thought, maybe I don't need to understand yet. Maybe it's enough to know I'm not alone. In the darkness beyond the firelight, something moved through the trees. Not a wolf, a man. One of Drummond's scouts watching from a distance, making notes in a small leather book. Woman acquired. Subject heading to Thunder Peak as predicted. Recommend proceeding with Phase 2. The scout tucked the notebook away and disappeared into the night, leaving no trace but boot prints that the falling snow would erase by morning. Grace woke to the smell of coffee. The sun hadn't yet risen, but Sam had already broken camp, packed the horses, and brewed coffee in a small tin pot over the rekindled fire. He handed her a cup without speaking. The coffee was bitter, strong, perfect. They ate a quick breakfast of hardtack and dried meat, then continued the journey upward. The trail grew steeper, narrower, more treacherous. Ice coated the rocks. In places, one side of the path dropped away into nothingness, a 500-foot fall to the valley floor below. Grace clung to the horse's mane, not looking down, trying not to think about what would happen if midnight slipped. But midnight didn't slip. The horse moved with the careful deliberation of an animal who had made this journey many times and intended to make it many times more. Sam walked ahead, occasionally testing the ice with his boot before allowing the horse to follow. He said nothing, but his body language spoke clearly. "I will not let you fall." They climbed for 4 hours without stopping. The air grew thinner. Grace found herself gasping dizzy, her heart pounding in her chest from more than just fear. Sam noticed. "The altitude. You'll adjust in a few days. Thunder Peak sits at 9,200 feet. The air's thinner up here." Mary, did she adjust? Sam's shoulders tensed. No, she never did. Always felt lightheaded. Always struggled to breathe. He paused, then added quietly, "I should have taken her back down. Should have realized this place was killing her." Grace heard the guilt in those words, thick and choking. This man blamed himself. 4 years, 2 months, 11 days later, and he still carried that weight. "Sam," she said softly, "you loved them. That's not a sin." He didn't respond. But something in the line of his shoulders softened just slightly. At 2 in the afternoon they crested a final ridge, and Grace saw it. Thunder Peak Cabin. She had expected a shack, a rough shelter barely better than a cave. What she saw instead stole the breath from her already laboring lungs. A house. A real house. 2 stories built from massive pine logs fitted together with such precision that not even the wind could find purchase between them. The roof pitched steeply to shed the heavy mountain snow. A stone chimney rose from the center, smoke curling from its top. Windows, real glass windows, caught the afternoon sun. And the porch. A wide porch wrapped around the front, its railing carved with images of bears and eagles, each line so detailed Grace could see individual feathers, individual claws. "You built this?" Sam dismounted, his voice quiet. "Every beam. Took 3 years. Built it for Mary and Thomas. They lived here 2 years before they died." Grace slid from the horse, her legs unsteady. She walked closer, her eyes taking in details. The door was thick oak hinged with iron. Sam must have forged himself. The windows had shutters that could be closed against storms, each shutter carved with the same meticulous detail as the porch railing. This wasn't just shelter. This was art. This was love made tangible in wood and stone. Sam opened the door. Heat washed out, blessed and overwhelming. The interior was even more stunning than the exterior. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, built from granite blocks that must have weighed hundreds of pounds each. The hearth was wide enough to roast an entire deer. A fire burned there now, its warmth filling every corner of the single large room that comprised the first floor. The floor was polished pine covered in places with thick bearskin rugs. A long table of dark wood sat beneath the windows, surrounded by chairs Sam had clearly made himself. The kitchen area held a cast-iron stove, shelves of tin plates and iron cookware, and a hand pump that suggested running water, in almost unthinkable luxury this far into the wilderness. But what caught Grace's attention most were the books. Shelves lined one entire wall, floor to ceiling, packed with volumes. Shakespeare, medical texts, atlases, the Bible, poetry, novels, hundreds of books. "Mary loved to read," Sam said, following her gaze. "I bought books every time I went to Denver. She'd read 3 or 4 a month." Grace touched the spines reverently. "You read them too." "I read to Thomas every night. He liked stories about knights and dragons." Sam's voice roughened. "He'd make me do different voices for each character." The image of this massive, scarred man sitting by the fire doing silly voices for a 6-year-old boy nearly broke Grace's heart. On the wall above the books hung a violin, polished wood gleaming in the firelight. Sam climbed the stairs. "I'll show you your room." Grace followed her hand on the smooth railing. The second floor had 3 rooms. One large bedroom, clearly Sam's, where a massive bed sat unmade, and clothes lay scattered with the disorder of a man living alone. A second smaller room where toys still sat on shelves, a child's blanket folded with heartbreaking care. Thomas's room, preserved like a shrine. Sam opened the third door. This room was immaculate. A large feather bed with fresh linens, a nightstand with a pitcher of clean water and a ceramic basin, a window looking south over the valley, and on the sill a vase held fresh pine boughs, their scent filling the air. "This is yours." Grace turned to him, confusion and something else, something warmer, mixing in her chest. "You prepared this room before you came to town." Sam stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands. "Ruth, my sister, she told me I should find someone so I wouldn't have to die alone in this house. I wasn't planning to listen, but when I went to town and heard about the mail-order brides coming, I thought maybe—" He stopped, searching for words. "Maybe Thomas and Mary wouldn't want me to die alone here." "So, you came looking for a wife?" "No." Sam shook his head. "I came looking for a companion, someone who could help carry the weight of loneliness. I can't promise love. I can't promise happiness. But I can promise you won't have to be afraid here. This room is yours. You want to close the door, you close it. You want to be left alone, I'll leave you alone. I just didn't want you to have to live in fear." Grace's throat tightened. This man, this stranger, was offering her something no one ever had: agency, choice, safety. "I won't bother you," Sam continued. "I just ask that you be honest. If you want to leave, tell me. I'll take you to Denver, give you money to start over somewhere else. But if you stay, I'll do my best to make sure you don't regret it." Grace looked around the room at the care that had gone into preparing it, at the fresh water and clean linens and pine boughs that said someone had thought about her comfort before ever meeting her. "Thank you," she whispered. Sam nodded and turned to leave. "Sam." He paused in the doorway. "Why did you really choose me, the truth?" He was silent for a long moment. Then, "Because when I looked at you standing on that platform alone with everyone laughing, you didn't cry. You stood there with your head up and your eyes clear, and I thought, there's a woman who's learned to endure. Up here that matters more than anything else. Pretty faces don't last through winter storms, but endurance that lasts." He left his boots heavy on the stairs. Grace sat on the bed, her hands shaking. She looked out the window at the mountains, at the vast expanse of wilderness that would be her new home. And for the first time since boarding the train in Boston, Grace Murphy allowed herself to cry. Not from sadness, not from fear, but from the overwhelming relief of being seen as something other than a burden. She cried until the tears ran dry, then she washed her face in the basin, straightened her dress, and went downstairs. She found Sam adding wood to the fire. "What can I do to help?" He glanced at her, and something flickered in those storm-gray eyes. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of an equal. "Supper needs making. Kitchen's yours if you want it." Grace rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The days fell into rhythm with the inevitability of seasons. Grace woke each morning to the sound of Sam's axe biting into wood, the crack echoing across the valley like gunshots. She would lie in her bed for a moment, wrapped in the warmth of blankets thicker than any she'd known in Boston, and listen to the steady percussion of his labor. There was something deeply comforting about that sound. It spoke of competence, of provision, of a man who knew his purpose. By the time she descended the stairs, the fire would be roaring water already heating in the kettle. Sam never asked her to cook, never demanded anything. But Grace found herself wanting to contribute, needing to prove she was more than dead weight in this isolated kingdom of ice and stone. On the morning of December 20th, she made pancakes using flour from Sam's well-stocked larder eggs, from the chickens he kept in a small coop behind the cabin, and syrup he'd boiled down from maple trees the previous spring. She fried bacon until it crisped, the smell filling the cabin with something approaching domesticity. When Sam came in from his morning chores, stamping snow from his boots, he stopped at the side of the table set with food. "You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to." Grace poured coffee into his tin cup. "I want to help." Sam sat regarding the pancakes with an expression she couldn't quite read. He cut a piece, ate it slowly, deliberately. Then he nodded once. "Good. Mary made them like this." It wasn't comparison. It was connection. Grace understood the difference. They ate in companionable silence, the kind that exists between people who are learning they don't always need words to communicate. On December 21st, Sam taught her how to split wood. He showed her how to hold the axe, how to stand, how to swing, so the blade bit true without straining her back or risking her shins. Grace's first attempt was disaster. The axe glanced off the log and nearly took her foot. Sam stepped behind her, his large hands covering hers on the handle. Not strength, accuracy. His voice was low, patient. Feel where the grain wants to split. Help it along. The second swing, the log split clean in two. Grace laughed a real laugh, surprised and delighted at her own success. It was the first time she'd laughed since leaving Boston, possibly the first genuine laugh in years. Sam's mouth twitched at the corners. Not quite a smile, but something warmer than his usual stoic expression. Again. They spent an hour splitting wood, Sam correcting her form with gentle adjustments, Grace feeling strength she didn't know she possessed flowing into her arms and back. By the end, she had a pile of split logs and blisters forming on her palms. Sam examined her hands without asking permission, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle. You'll get calluses. They'll hurt for a week, then you won't feel it anymore. Is that how everything works here? Grace asked. Pain, then numbness. No. Sam met her eyes. Pain, then strength. On December 22nd, the blizzard arrived. Grace woke to a world transformed. Snow fell so thick she couldn't see 10 feet beyond the windows. The wind howled like a living thing trying to tear the cabin from its foundation. The temperature plummeted to 20 degrees below zero. Sam spent the morning checking the shutters, reinforcing the doors, bringing extra firewood inside. We might be snowed in for 3 days, maybe more. Grace felt a flutter of panic. Trapped. She'd spent her life feeling trapped, and now the mountain itself was imprisoning her. But as the day wore on, the panic faded. The cabin was warm, the larder was full, and Sam moved through the space with the calm certainty of a man who had weathered countless storms. By evening, they sat by the fire. Sam read a book on medicinal plants while Grace mended his clothes shirt she'd found with tears and missing buttons, testament to years of solitary living. The silence stretched, broken only by the crack of burning wood and the howl of wind outside. Sam, Grace said finally, can I ask you something? He lowered his book. Ask. What was Mary like? For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. His jaw worked as if chewing words too tough to swallow. Then he spoke. Small, delicate. The doctor in Boston told her she shouldn't have children. Her heart was weak. But she wanted Thomas more than she wanted life itself. Sam stared into the flames. He was born and she was happy. Happier than I'd ever seen anyone. But her body never recovered. And then the lung fever came. He paused, and Grace waited, understanding that some stories can't be rushed. I rode her down to town when she started coughing blood, but the doctor couldn't do anything. Thomas caught it from her. 2 weeks. That's all it took. I held Thomas when he stopped breathing, and Mary died in my arms 3 days later. Grace set down her sewing, her hands folded in her lap. Her last words were, Don't die alone, Sam. Promise me. His voice cracked. I promised. Then I came back to this cabin and lived alone for 4 years, 2 months, 11 days. Breaking my promise every single day. Grace stood and moved to sit beside him on the long wooden bench, not touching but close enough that he could feel her presence. I can't replace her, Grace said softly. And I won't try. But I'm here, and I won't let you die alone. Sam turned to look at her, and in the firelight she saw his eyes were wet. Thank you. They sat like that for an hour, listening to the storm rage outside, while inside something warmer than fire began to grow. On December 24th, Christmas Eve, the storm broke. The world emerged white and new, the sun blinding against fresh snow. Sam was outside early, clearing paths, checking on the animals. Grace was baking bread when she heard hoofbeats. Sam appeared in the doorway, rifle in hand, his face alert. Someone's coming. A woman on horseback crested the ridge, a pack mule behind her laden with supplies. She was perhaps 45, with brown hair pulled back in a practical bun and the weathered face of someone who'd spent years fighting against the elements and winning. Ruth, Sam called, lowering his weapon. Ruth Thornhill dismounted and embraced her younger brother with the fierce affection of someone who'd worried about him for too long. Then she turned to Grace, standing in the cabin doorway. "And you must be Grace." Grace nodded, suddenly nervous. Ruth studied her with sharp, assessing eyes. Not judgment exactly, evaluation. Then she smiled, and it transformed her face into something warm. "Welcome to the family, child." They spent the afternoon unloading supplies. Ruth had brought fabric for sewing, food staples, medicines, ammunition, and a letter. As Grace and Ruth worked together in the kitchen preparing Christmas dinner, Ruth spoke quietly. "Do you like him?" Grace felt her cheeks flush. "I barely know him. 3 weeks alone in these mountains is worth 3 years anywhere else." Ruth kneaded bread dough with practiced efficiency. "I see the way he looks at you, different from how he looked at Mary." "How is it different?" "With Mary, Sam felt responsible, like he had to protect her from the world." Ruth shaped the dough into loaves. "With you, he looks like he wants to share the burden, like he's found a partner instead of someone to shelter." Ruth pulled a small leather journal from her bag. "This was Mary's diary. She wrote it for me before she died. She wanted the next woman in Sam's life to know something." Grace took the journal with trembling hands. The last page was dated February 10th, 1875. The handwriting was shaky but determined. "Ruth, if Sam finds someone after I'm gone, please tell her. He loved me, but his heart is big enough for more than one person. Don't let him feel guilty for living again. And tell her he will test her. Not with words, but with silence. If she waits through the silence, she will find a man worth waiting for." Grace's vision blurred with tears. She was extraordinary. "Yes, and so are you. Sam chose well." Later that afternoon, Sam opened Ruth's letter while the women prepared dinner. Grace watched his face change, watched color drain from weathered skin. "What is it?" Ruth asked. Sam handed her the letter. Ruth read, and her expression mirrored her brother's concern. The letter was from Deputy Tom Porter. "Sam Silas Drummond has filed a complaint with the U.S. Marshal. He claims Grace Murphy is his legal property under a contract with Whitmore Agency signed December 5th. The Marshal will investigate in early February. Drummond wants your land. This is just his excuse. Be careful. Tom." Grace read over Sam's shoulder, her stomach turning to ice. "I have to go back. If I don't, you'll be arrested." "No." Sam's voice was hard as granite. "You stay here." "But the law." "Drummond wants the land. You're just the tool he's using." Sam folded the letter with deliberate care, as if controlling the paper could control the rage building inside him. "I won't let him have either." Ruth looked at her brother. "What will you do?" Sam stared out the window at the mountains he'd claimed as home, at the land he'd worked for 8 years, at the cabin he'd built with his own hands for a family now buried in Copper Ridge Cemetery. "I'll fight." The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Grace felt fear and something else, something fiercer, rise in her chest. For the first time in her life, someone was willing to fight for her. Not out of obligation, not from pity, but because he'd made a choice and refused to unmake it. "How long do we have?" Grace asked. 6 weeks, Ruth said. "Maybe less if Drummond moves faster than expected. Then we prepare." Sam moved to a cabinet, pulling out maps of the surrounding territory. "Ruth, I need to know what Drummond's planning, who's working for him, and any weakness we can exploit." Ruth nodded. "Tom Porter is still sympathetic. Sheriff Mason is in Drummond's pocket, but Tom has a conscience. I'll talk to him." "And Father Benedict?" Grace asked. "Surely a priest wouldn't help Drummond do something wrong." The look Ruth and Sam exchanged told Grace everything she needed to know before Ruth spoke. "Father Benedict owes Drummond $5,000, borrowed it to build the new church. He'll do whatever Drummond says, conscience or not." Grace felt hope waver. "So we have no allies." Sam looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something that made her breath catch. "We have each other. Sometimes that's enough." Christmas dinner was a strange affair. They tried to celebrate, tried to pretend the letter hadn't changed everything. But the shadow of Drummond's threat hung over the table like storm clouds. After Ruth left the following morning, promising to gather information and return within 2 weeks, Sam and Grace began preparations in earnest. Over the next 10 days, the cabin transformed into a fortress. Sam dug shallow trenches around the perimeter, covering them with snow, tripwires strung low to catch attackers in darkness. He reinforced windows with thick planks, drilling small holes for rifle barrels. He stockpiled ammunition, food, water, medical supplies, and he trained Grace. Not just in shooting, though, that continued. On December 26th, he set up targets at 50 feet and taught her to fire while moving, while kneeling, while prone. Taught her to reload in darkness, to clear jams, to keep her hands steady when fear made them shake. "You're a better shot than I was at your age," Sam said on the 3rd day, watching her hit 9 cans out of 10. But more than marksmanship, he taught her survival, how to recognize avalanche danger, how to find water under ice, how to build fire from wet wood, how to construct emergency shelter. "If something happens to me," Sam said during one lesson, "you need to be able to survive alone. Nothing's going to happen to you." Sam gripped her shoulders, his eyes intense. "Promise me, if I fall, you run. You take midnight and you ride to Ruth's. You don't look back. Promise." Grace wanted to refuse, but she saw the desperation in his face and understood. He'd lost everyone he loved once already. He couldn't bear the thought of failing to protect someone again. "I promise." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. On December 30th, New Year's Eve, they shared a quiet dinner by the fire. Sam had heated spiced cider, and Grace had baked an apple pie with the last of the dried fruit. At midnight, marked by Sam's grandfather clock that stood in the corner like a sentinel, Sam raised his cup. "To a new year." "A new year," Grace echoed. They drank, and the silence stretched between them, full of things unsaid. "Grace," Sam began, then stopped. Started again. "If you want to leave before Drummond comes, I'll understand. I'll take you to Denver, give you money for a fresh start. You don't owe me anything." Grace set her cup down and turned to face him fully. "I don't want to leave." "You could be hurt. Or killed. I've spent 26 years being safe. Safe from danger. Safe from risk. Safe from anything that might disrupt the careful order of a life I hated." She met his eyes without flinching. 3 weeks here with you, I've felt more alive than in all those years. I'm not leaving." Sam's breath came out in a rush, as if he'd been holding it for days. "I feel the same." They sat closer, then not touching, but near enough to feel each other's warmth. The clock ticked. The fire crackled. Outside, the mountain slept beneath its blanket of snow, and inside Thunder Peak cabin, 2 people who'd been alone for too long found themselves less alone. But beyond the circle of firelight, beyond the warmth and safety of the cabin, other forces were moving. In Copper Ridge, Silas Drummond sat in his office reading reports from his scouts. He smiled cold and satisfied. "They're preparing for a siege," he said to Father Benedict, who stood by the window, his face troubled. "Reinforcing the cabin, stockpiling supplies. Thornhill thinks I'll attack directly." "Won't you?" Father Benedict asked. "Eventually, but first I'll offer him a way out." Drummond pulled out fresh paper and began writing. "I'll give him 15,000 for Thunder Peak. A fraction of what it's worth, but more than he can refuse if he wants to save the woman. And if he refuses anyway," Drummond's smile widened, "then I'll take what I want the hard way. I've hired 6 more men, professionals from Denver. When they arrive, we'll have 8 guns total. More than enough to handle 1 mountain man and a fat Irish girl." Father Benedict flinched at the casual cruelty. "This is wrong, Silas. You know it's wrong." "What I know," Drummond said, standing to pour himself whiskey, "is that Thunder Peak sits on the richest silver deposit in Colorado. What I know is that I've spent 18 months planning this acquisition, and what I know is that I don't let anything or anyone stand between me and what's mine." He raised his glass in a mock toast, to the new year, and to the fall of Samuel Thornhill. On January 3, 1879, 2 riders approached Thunder Peak from the south. They stopped 200 yards from the cabin, visible, but out of rifle range. Sam saw them through the window and immediately moved to action. "Grace basement, now." "What?" "There's a trap door under the rug by the hearth. Go down and don't come up until I call you." Grace wanted to argue, but the look on Sam's face stopped her. She lifted the rug, found the hidden door, and descended into darkness. Sam closed it behind her, replacing the rug, erasing all evidence of her presence. Then he took his rifle and stepped onto the porch. The two men sat their horses, hands visible, displaying no obvious weapons. But Sam knew threat when he saw it. These were professionals, hired guns. The older one, maybe 35, with a scar across his throat, called out, "Mr. Thornhill, we mean no disrespect, just here to deliver a message from Mr. Drummond." "Speak it from there." The man threw a leather packet into the snow between them. "Mr. Drummond wishes to buy your land, $15,000, fair price for a fair transaction." Sam didn't move toward the packet. "15,000 for land worth 200,000 if the silver's mined. Does Drummond think I'm stupid?" The younger rider, maybe 28, grinned. "You got no choice, old man. Drummond's got a legal claim on that woman. When the marshal comes—" The rifle shot kicked up snow 3 inches from the younger man's horse. The animal reared, nearly throwing its rider. Sam worked the bolt, chambering another round. "Next person steps on my land without invitation gets a bullet in the head, not a warning shot. Now get." The two men wheeled their horses and galloped back down the mountain. Sam watched until they disappeared, then walked to the packet and picked it up. Inside was a formal offer letter and a copy of a contract. Grace Murphy's purchase agreement with Silas Drummond, dated December 5, 1878. Notarized, legal. Sam crumpled the papers in his fist. Grace emerged from the basement, her face pale. "They're going to come back, aren't they?" "Yes. Next time with more men." "How many more?" Sam looked at the contract in his hand, at the official seal that gave Drummond legal backing for what amounted to slavery. "As many as it takes." Over the next week they worked 14-hour days. Sam taught Grace field medicine, how to treat gunshot wounds, how to prevent infection with whiskey and fire. He showed her the escape tunnel he'd dug from the basement, leading 200 yards into the forest, camouflaged at the exit with brush and rocks. "If they breach the cabin, you use this. Don't wait for me. Just run." "I won't leave you." "Grace." Sam took her face in his hands, his palms rough against her cheeks. "I've already lost everyone I loved once. I can't. I won't watch it happen again. Promise me you'll run if it comes to that." She saw the raw fear in his eyes, the terror of a man who'd held his son as life fled, who'd felt his wife's last breath against his neck. She understood then that his insistence on her survival wasn't about her. It was about him not being able to endure that particular hell twice. "I promise." She lied again, knowing she would never keep that promise, knowing she would rather die beside him than live carrying the guilt of abandonment. On January 10th, they sat by the fire after another exhausting day of preparation. Grace was bandaging a cut on Sam's hand where a knife had slipped while he was sharpening stakes for the perimeter defenses. She worked carefully, her fingers gentle, despite the calluses she'd earned over 3 weeks of hard labor. Sam watched her face, the concentration in her eyes, the slight furrow between her brows. "Grace, there's something I need to tell you." She looked up. "What?" "My family, they sold me too. Not literally, but close enough." She kept wrapping the bandage, giving him space to speak. "My father said I was a burden. My brother said I was well too ugly and too fat for any decent man to marry. My mother just looked away when they put me on the train." Sam's jaw tightened, anger flickering across his face. But he said nothing, just listened. "For 26 years I believed them. I believed I was worthless. I believed I was ugly. I believed I didn't deserve love or kindness or even basic human dignity." Her hands stilled on the bandage. "But 3 weeks here you've treated me like I have value. You've taught me skills. You've trusted me. And for the first time in my life I'm starting to believe maybe they were wrong." Sam covered her hands with his free one. "They were wrong." His voice was low but absolutely certain. "You're strong. You're capable. You're brave. Anyone who couldn't see that is blind. Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. Thank you. And Grace, if we survive this, if we get through what's coming, I want you to stay. Not because of obligation, not because of any contract, but because, he paused, searching for words, because I've started feeling something I thought died with Mary, something I never expected to feel again. Grace set the finished bandage aside and placed her hand against Sam's scarred cheek. So have I. They leaned toward each other slowly, giving either one time to retreat, but neither did. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and desperate all at once, the kiss of two people who'd been alone too long and were terrified of losing what they'd found. When they finally pulled apart, Sam rested his forehead against hers. Whatever happens, I want you to know that these 3 weeks they've been a gift. For me, too. They sat in the firelight holding each other, gathering strength for the storm they both knew was coming. On January 12th, Ruth returned her horse lathered with sweat despite the cold. She burst into the cabin without knocking. Drummond's moving faster than we thought. He's hired 8 men. They arrived in Copper Ridge yesterday. Tom says they plan to attack on January 18th. Sam stood, his face hardening into the expression of a man preparing for war. 6 days. There's more. Ruth handed him a letter. Tom managed to get this to me in secret. There's a way out, but it's risky. Sam read the letter aloud so Grace could hear. Sam Drummond plans night assault January 18th. 8 men. They'll burn you out if you don't surrender. He has a judge in Denver ready to sign an arrest warrant the moment you leave the mountain. There's one way: prove Grace came willingly. Get her testimony before neutral witnesses that she chose you. The contract becomes void. But you need to come to town. Drummond's waiting for exactly that. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Tom. Grace read over his shoulder. I'll go. I'll testify. No, Sam said immediately. He'll arrest you before you can speak. Ruth held up a hand. There's another way. Not Copper Ridge, Silver Fork. Sam frowned. The mining town 40 miles east. Magistrate Thomas Crawford presides there. He's not in Drummond's pocket. If Grace testifies before him with witnesses, it has legal weight. Drummond will know the moment we leave. Yes, but if you take the northern pass, the route nobody knows about, you can reach Silver Fork in 2 days, before Drummond can react. Grace looked at Sam. It's our only chance, isn't it? Sam didn't answer immediately. He walked to the window, staring at the mountains that had been his sanctuary and his prison for 8 years. Finally, he spoke. It's a risk. But staying here waiting to be slaughtered is also a risk. He turned back to them. We leave tomorrow at dawn. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She stood at her window, watching moonlight paint the snow silver, thinking about the journey ahead, about the legal battle, about Drummond's hired guns. She heard footsteps on the stairs and turned to find Sam in her doorway. Can't sleep either, she asked. Too much thinking. He entered the room, something he'd never done before, respecting the boundary he'd established. Grace, I need you to understand something about tomorrow. What? The northern pass is dangerous. Narrow trail, steep drops, avalanche risk, and if Drummond somehow learns our route, we'll be exposed. I understand. No. Sam moved closer. I don't think you do. If something happens to me on that trail, if I fall or if we're ambushed, you take midnight and you ride for Silver Fork alone. You give your testimony, and then you go to Denver and disappear. Start a new life. Sam, I won't. Please. His voice broke on the word. I've lost everyone. Mary. Thomas. I can't. Grace, I can't go through that again. Promise me if I die you'll live. Promise me you won't throw your life away trying to save a dead man. Grace saw the terror in his eyes, the survivor's guilt that had haunted him for 4 years, 2 months, and however many days it had been. She understood then that his fear wasn't of death. It was of failing to protect someone he loved. Again. She took his hands. I promise. But Sam, you have to promise me something too. What? Promise me you'll fight to survive. Not just for me. For yourself. Promise me you won't give up. Sam pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that felt like both shelter and surrender. "I promise." They stood like that for a long time, two people on the edge of a precipice holding on to each other as the only solid thing in a world gone unstable. Finally, Sam pulled back. "Try to sleep. Tomorrow will be hard." But he didn't leave. Instead, he sat in the chair by her window rifle across his knees, keeping watch as he had that first night when she was still a stranger. Grace climbed into bed and watched him outlined against the moonlit window, this scarred mountain of a man who had chosen her when no one else would. And she thought, whatever comes tomorrow, whatever Drummond throws at us, I'm not alone, and that's worth fighting for. At dawn on January 13th, they departed Thunder Peak. Ruth stayed behind to maintain the illusion they were still in residence, lighting fires, opening and closing shutters on schedule. The northern pass was everything Sam had warned, and worse. The trail was barely wide enough for a single horse carved into a cliff face, with a 500-foot drop on one side and sheer rock on the other. Ice coated everything, making each step a gamble with gravity. Sam led Midnight with Grace mounted, testing each foothold before allowing the horse to follow. The temperature dropped to 18 below zero. Wind howled through the pass like the screams of the damned. 3 hours into the journey, they heard it. A crack like a rifle shot echoing from above. Sam's head snapped up. "Avalanche! Ride! Now!" They spurred Midnight forward as a river of white death poured down the mountainside 200 yards behind them. Grace clung to the saddle as the horse galloped along the narrow trail, Sam running ahead, pulling them forward. The avalanche roared closer, a wall of snow and ice and rock traveling at 60 miles per hour. They burst from the pass into a forest of pines just as the avalanche swept across the trail behind them, obliterating the path, filling the pass with thousands of tons of snow and debris. They stopped, both breathing hard, Midnight's sides heaving. Sam looked back at the blocked pass. "We can't go back that way. The trail's gone." Grace understood what he wasn't saying. They were committed now. Forward was the only option. If they failed in Silver Fork, there was no retreat to Thunder Peak. They made camp that night in a clearing deep in the forest. Sam built a small fire, just enough for warmth, but not enough to be seen from a distance. They ate jerky and hardtack in silence, both too exhausted for conversation. As Grace was drifting toward sleep wrapped in blankets near the fire, a sound made Sam reach for his rifle. Footsteps. Someone approaching through the trees. A voice called out, "Don't shoot, Sam, it's me." Deputy Tom Porter stepped into the firelight, hands raised, showing he was unarmed. Sam didn't lower the rifle. "Tom, what are you doing here?" "I came to warn you. Drummond knows about Silver Fork." Grace sat up, fear flooding her chest. "How?" Tom looked miserable. "Ruth, she didn't mean to, but Drummond had someone following her. They heard her talking to me about the plan." Sam's jaw clenched. "So we're riding into a trap." "Yes and no. Drummond thinks you'll take the main road. He doesn't know about the northern pass. But when you arrive in Silver Fork, his men will be waiting." "Then there's no point going." "There's one way." Tom sat by the fire, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "But you won't like it." "Tell me." "Magistrate Crawford in Silver Fork, he's already been bought. Drummond paid him off 2 weeks ago. Any testimony Grace gives will be rejected." Grace felt hope die in her chest. "But," Tom continued, "there's someone else who can help. Father Benedict." "The priest?" Grace asked. "He works for Drummond. He owes Drummond money, but he also owes something to God, and deep down Benedict knows he's damned himself." Tom looked at Sam. "If you can make him confess his sins publicly, church law says that confession cannot be denied. It has legal weight." "How do I make him confess?" Tom's smile was grim. "Father Benedict is more afraid of dying than he is of Drummond. You're good at being frightening when you need to be." Sam understood. "You're asking me to threaten a priest. I'm asking you to save the woman you love by any means necessary." Tom stood. "Benedict goes to a retreat cabin in the woods every Tuesday to pray. He'll be there tomorrow, alone." He gave Sam directions, then melted back into the darkness, leaving them with a terrible choice. Grace looked at Sam. "You can't threaten a priest. It's blasphemy. It's survival." Sam's eyes were hard. "I've done worse things in my life. I can live with one more sin if it means you live." "Sam," Grace, "listen to me. I killed 17 men during the war. I shot some, stabbed others, watched them die and felt nothing but relief it wasn't me." His voice was rough with old pain. "I've already earned my place in hell. Threatening one corrupt priest won't change that." Grace saw then the darkness he carried, the things he'd done and seen that had carved lines into his face deeper than any scar. He wasn't a hero from a storybook. He was a man who'd survived terrible things by doing terrible things, and the weight of those acts had marked him forever. "Then I'm coming with you," she said. "No, it's too dangerous. I'm not letting you carry this alone." Grace's voice was steel. "We do this together or not at all." Sam looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Together." They found Father Benedict's retreat cabin the next afternoon, a small structure nestled in a valley between two ridges. Smoke rose from the chimney. A single horse stood tethered outside. Tom had been right. Benedict was alone. Sam told Grace to wait in the trees, then approached the cabin. He didn't knock. He simply opened the door and walked inside. Father Benedict knelt before a rough wooden cross, praying. He startled at the intrusion, spinning to face Sam. "Mr. Thornhill, you frightened me." Sam closed the door and locked it. "We need to talk, Father. If you've come for confession." "No, I've come for yours." Sam advanced into the room, each step deliberate. "I know you work for Drummond. I know you owe him $5,000. And I know you've helped him plan to steal my land." Father Benedict stood, trying to maintain dignity. "You're mistaken. I'm a man of God." Sam drew his pistol and aimed it at the priest's head. "Tell the truth, or I'll do something I'd rather not do." Benedict's face went white. "You wouldn't. You couldn't. Killing a priest damns your soul for eternity." "I've already killed 17 men." Sam's voice was cold as the winter outside. "I watched my son die in my arms. I held my wife as she took her last breath. I've lived 4 years in a hell of my own making." He cocked the hammer. "Whatever's waiting for me after death can't be worse than what I've already endured." Father Benedict began to cry. "Please, please don't." "Then talk." The priest collapsed to his knees, shaking. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Start with how you ended up in Drummond's pocket." And Father Benedict talked. The words spilled out like water from a cracked dam. He confessed to borrowing money for the church, to falsifying documents, to convincing townspeople to trust Drummond, to helping plan Grace's acquisition. "He has a real contract," Benedict sobbed. "Grace Murphy was sold to him by Whitmore on December 5th. You were tricked. Whitmore sold her twice." Sam's hand tightened on the pistol. "So legally she belongs to Drummond?" "Yes, but—" Benedict looked up, desperation in his eyes. "There's something Drummond doesn't know. Whitmore is dead." Sam went very still. "When, 3 days after you took Grace, drunk, fell downstairs, broke his neck, I performed the funeral. No one else knows. If Whitmore's dead, the contract can't be verified. Drummond has a notarized copy, but if someone could prove Whitmore sold Grace twice fraud, both contracts are void. And you'll testify to this." Benedict looked at the pistol, then at the cross on the wall. Tears streamed down his face. "If I testify against Drummond, he'll destroy me. And if you don't, I'll kill you right now. Choose." Father Benedict placed his hand on the Bible that lay on his prayer table. "I, Father Benedict Hayes, confess before God, and this witness, I helped Silas Drummond plan to steal Samuel Thornhill's land through fraud and false testimony. Grace Murphy was sold by Whitmore to both Drummond and Thornhill. The contract is fraudulent." From a back room, Tom Porter emerged. He'd been hidden there the entire time, listening. "I witnessed that confession," Tom said. "As a deputy, I can testify to what was said here." Benedict stared at Tom, betrayal and relief mixing on his face. "You were here the whole time." "I'm sorry, Father, But Sam's right. It's time for truth. Sam lowered the pistol but didn't holster it. You'll come with us to Copper Ridge. You'll repeat that confession in public. And then maybe God will forgive you, because I won't. They left the cabin with Father Benedict riding between them, broken and weeping. Grace met them in the forest, her eyes wide. Did it work? He confessed. We have what we need. Sam helped her on to midnight. But Drummond won't stop. This just gave us a fighting chance. They rode through the day and into the night, pushing hard for Thunder Peak. They needed to get back to prepare, because now Drummond would know they'd turned his own priest against him. The war was no longer coming. It had arrived. As they crested the final ridge approaching Thunder Peak at dawn on January 15th, they saw it, orange light against the gray sky. Fire. The cabin was burning, and Ruth was inside. Sam spurred his horse forward, Grace and Tom racing behind him while Father Benedict lagged back terrified. But as they got closer, they saw something that stopped Sam's heart. The cabin wasn't burning. The barn was. And standing in front of the cabin, rifle in hand, very much alive, was Ruth. Around her lay 3 bodies. Drummond's men. Dead. Ruth lowered her rifle as they approached, her face grim. They came 3 hours ago. Thought I was alone. They were wrong. Sam dismounted, looking at his sister with new understanding. You killed them. I've been shooting since I was 6 years old, little brother. Did you think I'd just sit here and let them take what's ours? She spat on one of the bodies. They underestimated me. Fatal mistake. Grace slid from her horse, staring at the dead men, at the burning barn, at Ruth, standing defiant in the dawn light. This was the world they lived in now, a world of fire and blood and choices that left stains on the soul. How many more are coming? Sam asked. Ruth's expression was grim. All of them. Drummond's done with subtlety. Tom's warning was right. They attack tomorrow night. Full force. Sam looked at his cabin, his mountain, his home that he'd built with his own hands for a family that was gone and a future he was trying to build. Then we make our stand here. No more running, no more hiding. He turned to Grace, Tom, Ruth, and even the trembling Father Benedict. Tomorrow, Silas Drummond brings his war to Thunder Peak. And we're going to show him what happens when you threaten family. Grace took Sam's hand, feeling the calluses, the scars, the strength. Together, she said. Together, he agreed. And as the sun rose over the Rocky Mountains, painting the snow gold and red like blood and fire, they prepared for the battle that would decide everything. The day of January 16th dawned cold and clear, the kind of crystalline mountain morning that made the world look deceptively peaceful. Sam stood on the porch of Thunder Peak cabin, surveying the defensive preparations, with the critical eye of a man who knew survival depended on details. The trenches around the perimeter were invisible beneath fresh snow, waiting to catch unwary feet. Tripwires crisscrossed the approaches at ankle height. The windows were reinforced with heavy planks, narrow firing slits cut with precision. Inside, ammunition was stacked within easy reach of every defensive position. Water barrels stood ready in case of fire. Medical supplies lay organized on the kitchen table, bandages and whiskey and thread for stitching wounds. Grace emerged from the cabin carrying another load of firewood, her breath steaming in the 14-degree air. 3 weeks of mountain life had changed her. The softness in her face had been replaced by lean muscle. Her hands bore calluses. She moved with confidence now, no longer the frightened woman who'd stood on that platform in Copper Ridge. "How many do you think will come?" she asked, stacking the wood beside the door. Sam didn't sugarcoat it. 8 men at least, maybe more if Drummond's desperate enough to hire additional guns from Denver. Tom Porter appeared from around the cabin's corner, having finished checking the rear approaches. "I've counted 6 different boot prints in the snow down by the tree line. They've been scouting us since yesterday." Ruth emerged, next rifle slung over her shoulder. She'd spent the morning fortifying the barn, now rebuilt after the attempted arson. "Let them watch. Let them see we're ready." Father Benedict sat inside by the fire, pale and shaking. He hadn't spoken since they'd forced his confession, hadn't eaten, hadn't done anything but stare at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. The weight of his betrayal, both of Drummond and of his own principles, had broken something inside him. "Father," Sam said, entering and standing over the priest, "I need you to write down your confession. Everything. Sign it. We need a legal document in case—" He paused. "In case none of us survive to testify." Benedict looked up with haunted eyes. "You really think he'll kill us all?" "I think Drummond wants that silver more than he values human life. So yes, I think he'll try." With trembling hands, Father Benedict began to write. As the day wore on, they finalized their preparations. Sam positioned everyone with military precision. Ruth would take the second floor, covering the eastern approach from Thomas's old room. Tom would watch the west from Sam's bedroom. Grace would stay on the main floor, covering the southern windows while maintaining access to medical supplies. "And you?" Grace asked Sam. "I'll be mobile, moving between positions as needed." He checked his rifle for the dozenth time. "If they breach the doors, we fall back to the second floor. If they breach that, we use the tunnel." "We won't need the tunnel," Grace said with more confidence than she felt. Sam pulled her aside away from the others. His voice dropped low. "Grace, if it comes down to it, if I tell you to run, you run. Don't think. Don't argue. Just go. We've had this conversation. And we'll keep having it until you promise me you'll actually do it." His hands gripped her shoulders. "I can fight better if I know you're safe. Please, give me that." Grace looked into his storm-gray eyes and saw the desperation there, the terror of a man who'd lost everything once and couldn't survive losing everything again. She placed her hands over his. "I promise I'll do what needs to be done to survive." It was as close to the truth as she could give him. As the sun set on January 16th, painting the snow orange and red, they gathered around the table for what might be their last meal together. Ruth had made stew from venison and root vegetables thick and rich. They ate in silence, each person lost in their own thoughts, their own fears, their own prayers. Father Benedict finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "I should say something. Offer absolution or blessing or some priestly comfort." "Can you?" Tom asked, not unkindly. "After everything you've done?" "No." Benedict's laugh was bitter. "I sold my soul for a church building, traded my integrity for architecture, and now I sit here waiting to die because I was too cowardly to stand up to a man who isn't worth the powder to blow him to hell." "You stood up eventually," Grace said quietly. "That counts for something." Does a confession given at gunpoint absolve the sin?" Sam set down his spoon. "I don't know about absolution, Father. But I know about survival. And right now, survival is more important than salvation." They finished the meal, cleaned the dishes, checked weapons one final time, and then they waited. Night fell with the weight of an executioner's blade. The attack came at 9:47, exactly as Tom had predicted. The crack of rifle fire shattered the silence like glass breaking, and a window on the south side exploded inward, showering Grace with shards. She dropped below the sill, heart hammering, and returned fire through the slot Sam had cut in the wooden reinforcement. She couldn't see what she was shooting at in the darkness, just muzzle flashes in the tree line. "8 of them!" Sam shouted from his position. "Spread out. 30-yard perimeter." More gunfire. The cabin walls were thick pine logs that could stop most bullets, but the windows were vulnerable. Another pane shattered, this one upstairs. Ruth's rifle barked in response. "Got one!" she called down. "He's down!" 7 left. The gunfight settled into a rhythm. Attackers would fire, forcing the defenders to cover, then attempt to advance. But Sam had positioned his trenches and tripwires perfectly. They heard cursing in the darkness as men stumbled, fell, struggled in snow, deeper than they'd anticipated. Grace fired 3 times at a shadow moving between trees. On the 3rd shot, the shadow fell and didn't rise. Her hands shook as she reloaded, the reality of what she'd just done hitting her like a physical blow. She'd killed a man. Sam appeared beside her, checking her position. "You okay?" "I shot him. I killed him." Yes, and if you hadn't, he would have killed you. Sam's voice was matter-of-fact, not cruel but brutally honest. You did what you had to do. Feel bad about it later. Right now, stay sharp. Outside, Silas Drummond's voice cut through the gunfire. Thornhill, this is pointless surrender. The woman, and I'll let the rest of you live. Sam moved to the door, opening it just enough to shout back. Come take her, Drummond, I'll be waiting. A volley of shots peppered the doorframe. Sam slammed it shut, wood splinters flying. He's losing control, Tom observed from upstairs. Desperate men make mistakes. But desperate men were also dangerous. The next assault came from multiple directions simultaneously. Fire arrows arced through the night sky, landing on the roof. Sam had anticipated this had soaked the shingles with water that had frozen into a protective ice layer, but some of the arrows stuck in the wood flames, guttering. Ruth, the roof, Sam called. She was already moving, climbing into the attic with a bucket of snow to extinguish any fires before they caught. Grace saw movement at the western window, a man attempting to pry open the shutters. She fired through the slot, the bullet catching him in the shoulder. He screamed and fell back. 6 left. The battle raged for 2 hours. The defenders fired carefully, conserving ammunition, making every shot count. The attackers fired wildly, relying on volume rather than precision. The cabin held its thick walls and reinforced positions, proving their worth. But they couldn't hold forever. At midnight, there was a pause. The gunfire stopped. An eerie silence fell over Thunder Peak. Sam moved from window to window, eyes scanning the darkness. What are they doing? Tom peered through his slot. Regrouping, or planning something. Or giving up, Grace suggested hopefully. Drummond doesn't give up. Sam's jaw was tight. This is the calm before something worse. He was right. 20 minutes later they heard it, the rumble of wagon wheels on frozen ground. They brought a wagon up here. Ruth sounded incredulous. In this terrain? Tom's face went pale. It's not what they brought up, it's what they're going to do with it. The wagon appeared in the moonlight, pulled by 2 horses filled with what looked like barrels. 4 men pushed it toward the cabin while 2 others provided covering fire. Sam understood immediately. Blasting powder. They're going to blow the cabin. They had perhaps 2 minutes. Sam made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Everyone to the tunnel. Now. We can stop them, Grace protested. Not before they light the fuse. Move. Ruth grabbed Father Benedict, who'd been cowering in the corner, and hauled him toward the basement. Tom followed. Sam turned to Grace. Go, I'll be right behind you. Grace recognized the lie. You're going to try to stop them. Someone has to. If that powder goes off while we're in the tunnel, it might collapse. We'd be buried alive. Then I'm staying with you. Grace, please. No. Her voice was iron. I made you a promise. To do what needs to be done to survive. We survive together or not at all. Sam looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. Acceptance, resignation, pride. Then we make them regret bringing that powder. They moved to the front door. Sam counted silently, timing the rhythm of covering fire. When there was a pause, he kicked the door open, and they ran. The wagon was 50 yards away, the men struggling to push it through snow and over hidden trenches. Sam's rifle came up, and he fired 3 times in rapid succession. 2 men fell. The others scattered, seeking cover. Grace fired at the wagon horses, not wanting to kill the animals, but needing to stop the wagon's progress. Her shot clipped the harness, and the panicked horses bolted, dragging the wagon sideways. It tipped barrels, rolling free. Sam and Grace ran forward. They reached the barrels just as one of Drummond's men emerged from behind a tree torch in hand, rushing to light the fuses. Sam fired. The man went down, but the torch fell into the snow near one of the barrels. Grace dove for it, snatching up the torch before it could ignite the powder. She stood holding the flame high, and found herself face to face with Silas Drummond. He'd emerged from the tree-lined pistol in hand, his handsome face twisted with rage and desperation. You were supposed to be mine. You were supposed to give me leverage. I belong to myself, Grace said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Drummond's laugh was ugly. You're nothing. a fat Irish whore who got lucky when a lonely fool decided he needed companionship. Sam appeared behind Grace's rifle trained on Drummond. "Keep talking and I'll put a bullet through your teeth." "You won't shoot me, Thornhill. You kill me and you'll hang. I'm a respected businessman. You're just a hermit with delusions of property rights. You hired men to kill us. You tried to blow up my home. I think a court would understand self-defense." Drummond's gun wavered. He was cornered and he knew it. His men were dead or dying. His powder was captured. His plan had fallen apart. But cornered animals are most dangerous. He swung his pistol toward Grace. Sam fired. The bullet took Drummond in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell to his knees, his gun dropping into the snow. Before Sam could move to secure him, Tom Porter emerged from the cabin badge gleaming in the moonlight. "Silas Drummond," Tom said formally, "you're under arrest for attempted murder, arson, conspiracy to commit fraud, and about a dozen other charges I'll think of on the ride to Denver." Drummond clutched his bleeding shoulder, his face a mask of pain and disbelief. "You can't. I own this town. I own you." "You owned nothing but the illusion of power." Tom cuffed Drummond's good hand to his belt. "And that illusion just died." The surviving attackers, seeing their employer captured and wounded, threw down their weapons and surrendered. Ruth and Father Benedict emerged from the cabin. Ruth's face was grim satisfaction. Benedict looked like a man who'd witnessed the apocalypse and somehow survived. As dawn broke over Thunder Peak on January 17, 1879, the battle was over. But the cost was evident. 3 of Drummond's men lay dead in the snow. 2 more were wounded. Sam's barn had sustained damage. Several windows were broken. And everyone who'd fought bore the weight of violence in their eyes, the knowledge that they'd killed or nearly been killed. Tom organized the prisoners, preparing to transport them and Drummond to Copper Ridge for trial. Father Benedict wrote out his confession again, this time without a gun to his head, and signed it in front of multiple witnesses. "This should be enough to void the contract and ensure Drummond faces justice," Tom said. "The U.S. Marshal will likely want testimony from all of you, but with Benedict's confession and my witness, there's no question of your innocence." Sam nodded, too exhausted to feel relieved. As Tom prepared to leave with the prisoners, he paused beside Sam. "You did good. You protected what was yours." "Is it over?" Sam asked. "Really over. The legal part might drag on for months, but Drummond's finished. His assets will be seized to pay for his crimes. You'll never hear from him again." After they left, a strange quiet settled over Thunder Peak. Grace and Sam stood on the porch watching the sun climb higher, painting the blood-stained snow in shades of gold and pink. "We should clean up," Grace said. "Later." Sam pulled her close. "First we just breathe." They stood there alive, victorious, traumatized, and utterly spent. The weeks that followed were a blur of testimony and legal proceedings. The U.S. Marshal arrived, interviewed everyone, examined the evidence, and concluded that Samuel Thornhill and his companions had acted in lawful self-defense against an armed assault. Father Benedict's confession was damning. It revealed not just Drummond's plot against Sam, but also a pattern of fraud and corruption that implicated several other Copper Ridge businessmen. The church stripped Benedict of his position, but he found unexpected redemption working in Ruth's boarding house, offering counsel to those who needed someone who understood sin and regret. Silas Drummond stood trial in Denver in March. The evidence was overwhelming. He was sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison for fraud, attempted murder, and conspiracy. His assets were liquidated, his reputation destroyed. The man who'd once owned half of Copper Ridge died penniless in prison 7 years later, unmourned and forgotten. Tom Porter was appointed sheriff of Copper Ridge when Sheriff Mason was arrested as Drummond's accomplice. Tom proved to be fair and honest, exactly what the town needed. And on Thunder Peak, life slowly returned to something approaching normal. Grace and Sam were married in a small ceremony in April, with Ruth as witness and the mountains as their cathedral. There was no priest, just the 2 of them standing before each other speaking vows they'd written themselves. "I promise to stand beside you," Sam said, his scarred hands holding hers, "in plenty and in want, in joy and in sorrow, until death takes one of us. And even then, I promise you won't be forgotten." "I promise to be your partner." Grace replied, tears streaming down her face. "Not your burden, to share your strength and your weakness, to build a life with you that honors both our pasts and our future." They exchanged simple gold bands that Sam had forged himself in the cabin's hearth. And they built that life day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment. Sam began modest mining of the silver vein, extracting enough to provide comfort, but not so much that it consumed his life. He used the profits to fund a school in Copper Ridge, naming it the Thomas and Mary Thornhill School for Children, ensuring his lost family was remembered not through grief, but through legacy. Grace taught reading to the women of Copper Ridge and the surrounding homesteads, many of them mail-order brides like herself, women who'd been told they were worthless and needed to hear otherwise. She never forgot what it felt like to stand on that platform unwanted and afraid. Ruth remained their closest friend and fiercest defender, visiting often her sharp tongue and sharper rifle, ensuring no one ever threatened her brother's family again. The years passed. Thunder Peak Cabin expanded, new rooms added as needed. The scars of battle faded, though some bullet holes remained in the wooden walls, reminders of the night they'd fought for their right to exist. And one autumn evening in 1918, 40 years after that cold December day in Copper Ridge, an old man sat on the porch of Thunder Peak with his grandson telling the story of how he'd met the boy's grandmother. Sam Thornhill, now 79 years old, finished his tale as the sun set behind the same peaks he'd called home for nearly 5 decades. Young Samuel, 12 years old and wide-eyed, looked up at his grandfather. "So you really did steal Grandma?" "I paid for her fair and square," old Sam said with a ghost of a smile. "But yes, I suppose from Drummond's perspective I stole what he thought was his. And Grandma, she really killed one of the bad men." "She did. Saved my life more than once that winter." Sam's eyes grew distant. "Your grandmother was the strongest person I ever knew. When she died last spring, I thought I'd die too. But then you started coming around asking questions, wanting stories, and I realized she'd want me to keep living, keep telling her story." "What happened to the cabin?" "The one that got shot up. Still standing, same cabin you're sitting in front of right now." Sam gestured to the building behind them. "Those bullet holes in the wall there, those are from that night. Your grandmother wouldn't let me patch them over, said they were reminders that she'd been worth fighting for." Young Samuel stood and walked to the wall, running his fingers over the old damage, touching history made tangible. "Grandpa, do you miss her?" "Every single day. But I also thank God for every day I had with her." Sam stood, his old bones creaking, and placed a hand on his grandson's shoulder. 41 years we had together, raised 5 children, saw 12 grandchildren born, built a life that started with her standing alone on a platform while cruel men laughed. "Did you love her right away?" Sam considered the question. "No, love came later. What I felt that day was recognition. I saw someone who'd learned to endure, and I thought there's a person I could build something with. Love grew from respect, from partnership, from choosing each other every day, even when it was hard." They stood together on the porch as stars began to appear, the same stars that had witnessed a desperate winter 4 decades ago. "Grandpa, what happened to the silver mine?" "Still there, still has silver. But we only took enough to live comfortably and help others. The mine made us wealthy, but it never made us greedy." Sam looked at the boy. "When I die, and I will soon, that mine becomes yours and your cousins. But I want you to promise me something." "What?" "Use it to help people, build things, create opportunities. Don't let it consume you. Silver is just metal. What matters is what you do with it." Young Samuel nodded solemnly. "I promise." They turned to go inside, but the boy paused. "Grandpa, one more question." "What's that?" "If you had to do it all again, knowing how hard it would be, would you still choose Grandma?" Sam smiled a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes and erased years from his weathered face. "Boy, I'd choose her 1,000 times, in 1,000 different lives. She made me better than I was, made me believe I deserved happiness after I thought I'd lost the right to it." They went inside where dinner waited and the fire burned warm. The cabin that had witnessed love and death and rebirth held them in its wooden embrace. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like whispered prayers. Snow began to fall the first of the season, covering the mountains in white purity. And somewhere in the darkness, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear the echo of an old Irish ballad sung in a woman's voice that had been silenced but never forgotten. Grace Murphy Thornhill had died at 67 years old, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren in the same bed where she'd spent her wedding night 41 years earlier. Her last words, according to those who were there, had been, "Thank you for seeing me." Sam had buried her in the small cemetery behind the cabin next to the graves of Mary and Thomas Thornhill. He'd carved her headstone himself, the letters deep and true. Grace Murphy Thornhill, 1852-1919. She was seen, she was valued, she was loved, beloved wife, mother, teacher, warrior. And below that a line she'd requested, "I was enough." Sam would join her there 3 years later in 1921, dying peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82. His children would bury him beside Grace, and on his stone they would carve Samuel Thornhill, 1839, 1921. He chose well, he fought hard, he loved completely. Beloved husband, father, protector, the Thunder Peak silver mine would provide for 3 generations of Thornhills before being donated to the state of Colorado as a historical site. The cabin would stand for another 100 years, preserved as a museum, its bullet-scarred walls testament to a battle fought for love and dignity. And on quiet winter nights, when the snow fell and the wind howled through the Rockies, visitors to the site would swear they could hear 2 voices intertwined and eternal speaking vows that transcended death. Until death takes one of us. And even then, I promise you won't be forgotten. They never were. The story of Sam and Grace Thornhill became legend in Colorado. Not because it was extraordinary in its events, though it certainly had drama enough, but because it was extraordinary in its message. That worth is not determined by those who refuse to see it. That strength comes in forms society often dismisses. That love, real love, is built on partnership and respect, not just passion. That sometimes the greatest act of courage is choosing to be vulnerable again after loss has taught you that vulnerability leads to pain. And that a woman standing alone on a platform, rejected and mocked, could become the cornerstone of a legacy that would endure for generations. The mail-order bride system that had brought Grace West would eventually be outlawed, recognized for the exploitation it often was. But before that happened, Grace Thornhill helped dozens of women who'd arrived the same way she had, offering them shelter, teaching them skills, ensuring they knew they had choices. Some of those women went on to become teachers, business owners, landowners, in their own right. One became the first female mayor of a Colorado town. Another wrote a book about women's rights that was widely read throughout the West. They all remembered the woman who'd taught them that their value wasn't determined by their weight, their age, their appearance, or the opinions of those who'd never bothered to truly see them. The Thomas and Mary Thornhill School still stands in Copper Ridge, though it's been expanded many times. On its wall hangs a plaque, founded 1880 by Samuel and Grace Thornhill, in memory of those lost and in hope for those yet to come. Education is the great equalizer. Knowledge is freedom, and every student, regardless of background, is worth the investment. And in the mountains above Copper Ridge, Thunder Peak Cabin stands sentinel over the valley, its logs weathered but strong, its foundation unshaken by time or storm. Inside, if you visit, you can still see the bullet holes in the walls. You can stand where Sam and Grace stood when they fought for their right to exist. You can touch the wood. Sam carved the dishes Grace used, the books they read together by firelight. And if you're very quiet, if you listen with more than your ears, you might hear what young Samuel Thornhill heard on that autumn evening in 1918. The sound of love hard-won and fiercely protected. The sound of dignity reclaimed from those who'd tried to steal it. The sound of 2 people who'd been alone finding each other in a world that tried to keep them apart. The sound of enough. Grace Murphy had spent 26 years being told she wasn't enough, wasn't pretty enough, thin enough, quiet enough, small enough. And then she met a man who said without words, but through every action, "You are exactly enough. You are more than enough. You are everything." And together they built a life that proved it. That's the true story of Thunder Peak. Not just a tale of frontier violence and legal battles, though it contains those elements, but a story of recognition, of seeing and being seen, of choosing partnership over loneliness and courage over surrender. It's a story that needed to be told, and now it has been. The old man's voice faded into silence. Young Samuel sat still, processing the weight of what he'd heard. The whiskey in his cup had gone cold. "So that's how Grandma came to you," the boy said finally. Sam Thornhill nodded, looking out at the mountains that had witnessed it all. "That's how she came, and that's how we built everything you see now." Was she really worth fighting for, Grandpa? The old man turned to his grandson, and in his eyes was the answer before he spoke. Boy, she was worth dying for. But more than that, she was worth living for. Young Samuel walked to the porch railing, looking at the same valley his grandmother had first seen 40 years ago. "I understand now why you kept the bullet holes, why you never left this place." "This place," Sam said, rising to stand beside him, "is where we learned that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about choosing someone real and fighting for that choice every single day." The snow continued to fall, covering Thunder Peak in its eternal blanket of white. "Come on, boy. Your mother will have supper ready, and tomorrow I'll show you the mine. Time you learned what it means to be a Thornhill." They walked inside together, grandfather and grandson. The story told, the legacy passed on. The door closed. The lights glowed warm through the windows, and the mountains stood witness, as they always had, to the enduring power of a choice made one cold December morning. The choice to see, the choice to claim, the choice to love.